7 Historic Allies, Cutting Ties with the U.S., 2025 Analysis. For decades, the United States stood at the center of a vast network of allies, nations that not only traded with America, but shared its vision of global leadership. But what happens when those same allies begin to walk away? What if the foundations of trust, loyalty, and strategic partnership are starting to erode? Not in hostile regimes, but in countries that once stood side by side with the U.S. in every major conflict. In 2025, that shift isn't hypothetical, it's happening. Recent data from the Pew Research Center shows a stunning reversal. Global favorability ratings for the U.S. have dropped by nearly 30% in key allied nations since 2020. And in quiet conference rooms, parliaments, and press briefings, traditional allies are making moves away from Washington. 2025 may go down in history as the year the world began turning away from America. Not in open revolt, but in a slow, deliberate disengagement. It's not the fall of an empire, it's the quiet retreat of trust. Take Canada, for example, a neighbor that shares not just a border, but centuries of cultural, economic, and military alliance. For generations, the U.S.-Canada relationship was seen as unbreakable, but that assumption is starting to crack. This year alone, over 1.2 million fewer Canadians crossed into the United States, citing not just economic reasons, but growing unease over gun violence, political division, and instability. Travel advisories, once reserved for war zones, now caution Canadians about major American cities. And when a Canadian trade delegation publicly criticized U.S. environmental deregulation, it wasn't just diplomatic, it was personal. Canada is not severing ties, but it is stepping back. And that alone is a profound shift. Across the Atlantic, the bond with France is unraveling in subtler ways. France has always maintained a fierce sense of sovereignty, even as a NATO member. But 2025 marks a turning point. Paris has withdrawn support for several U.S.-led sanctions, and President Macron has publicly declared the need for Europe to establish strategic autonomy from American influence. French arms manufacturers are lobbying to replace U.S. suppliers across Africa, and while French diplomats still smile in summits, they're building a future where Washington is no longer the guiding voice. In decades past, this would have triggered diplomatic uproar. Today, it barely makes headlines, because disengagement has become the norm. In Germany, the changes are more economic, but no less symbolic. Berlin's decision to resume energy partnerships with non-NATO-aligned countries, despite American objections, has sent shockwaves through the defense and trade communities. The U.S. once stationed over 35,000 troops in Germany. Today, that number is shrinking, quietly, strategically. German voters increasingly support a foreign policy that prioritizes European cohesion over transatlantic loyalty. And for the first time since World War II, Germany is discussing a security doctrine that does not begin with American partnership. Even Germany's educational institutions, once filled with joint American research projects, are shifting their grants and partnerships toward Asia and internal EU collaborations. A symbolic yet telling repositioning. But the ripples aren't just in the West. In Mexico, frustration with Washington has reached new heights. After years of border disputes, trade renegotiations, and sovereignty clashes, the Mexican government is taking a harder stance. In 2025, the Mexican president halted joint security operations along the border, citing interference and mistrust. American expats living in Mexico report an uptick in anti-U.S. sentiment, not violent, but wary. A sentiment that says, "You're welcome, but we're watching." The deep economic ties remain, but the political goodwill is fading. And that shift is generational. The younger Mexican population no longer sees the U.S. as a dream destination, but as a neighbor whose respect must now be earned. Additionally, Mexico is strengthening its ties with regional alliances like CELAC and seeking new partnerships with BRICS nations, indicators of a multipolar reorientation. Further across the Pacific, the Philippines is recalibrating. Once a cornerstone of America's military presence in Asia, the Philippines is now looking east toward China. Over the past year, Philippine leadership has signed new bilateral agreements with Beijing, ranging from infrastructure to joint maritime patrols. Washington has responded with concern, but not surprise, because this isn't about loyalty, it's about survival. Manila is making the calculation that American power in the region is no longer absolute, and they're preparing for a world where Washington might not come when called. The pivot is not only political but cultural. Public opinion polls indicate that younger Filipinos now see Chinese investment as more relevant to their future than U.S. military guarantees. South Korea is asking its own questions. For decades, the U.S.-South Korea alliance was sacred, a cornerstone of Pacific security. But 2025 has revealed cracks. Civil society groups are protesting the continued presence of American military bases. Lawmakers are debating the financial burden of U.S. defense agreements. And in polls, a growing number of South Koreans support developing independent military capabilities, including nuclear deterrence. These aren't fringe opinions. They are the reflection of a nation that no longer sees American support as unconditional or inevitable. Even cultural ties are shifting, with more emphasis on Pan-Asian cooperation and a gradual cooling of Hollywood influence in favor of regional media. Even Australia, long considered one of America's most reliable allies, is shifting course. While Canberra maintains friendly ties with Washington, it is now pursuing a more balanced approach. In 2025, Australia signed historic trade and defense agreements with Southeast Asian nations, carving out a new regional bloc that operates independently of both U.S. and Chinese influence. The message is clear. Australia will protect its own interests first and won't be pulled into global tensions that don't serve its people. Analysts suggest this signals a broader Pacific realignment, with Canberra hoping to serve as a stabilizing hub for regional resilience. The move is widely supported at home, where the public now favors neutrality over military entanglements. These 7 examples aren't isolated. They are part of a larger pattern. Around the world, nations are reevaluating what it means to stand with the United States, not because they oppose freedom or democracy, but because they no longer believe that America holds a monopoly on those values. In a multipolar world, power is shared, influence is negotiated, and alliances are not given, they're earned. So what does this mean for the average traveler, student, investor, or family who once saw the American passport as a golden ticket? It means recalibrating expectations. The days of automatic welcome are fading. In many places, being American now comes with baggage, political, cultural, and historical. And while doors remain open, the smiles behind them are more cautious, more conditional. It also means rethinking what it means to be a leader on the world stage. Influence doesn't just come from military might or economic clout. It comes from trust, consistency, and a willingness to listen. And in 2025, many U.S. allies are saying quietly but firmly, we're not sure if we still see that. Is this a downfall or a reckoning? That depends on what comes next. Alliances like friendships can be rebuilt, but they require humility, respect, and the recognition that loyalty cannot be demanded, it must be deserved. Let us know what you think in the comments. Which of these global shifts surprised you the most? And do you believe this is a permanent break or just a necessary course correction? Because as the world realigns, one thing is certain: the next time you travel, negotiate, or listen to the news, you might feel the shift too. And in our next video, we'll explore 7 countries where Americans are no longer welcome, why they're closing their borders, and what that means for the future of global movement. If this kind of analysis helps you make sense of what's changing in the world, hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications. Drop your thoughts in the comments. Do you think these breaks are temporary? Or are we witnessing a permanent shift in American influence?